is and where you can kind of walk around and what makes sense for that triangle, that you want in every kitchen between the sink, the fridge, and the stove. So sometimes that idea of an island is great if you have the space, but sometimes it's just not going to work. So you can't always put an island in there. Don't forget about the flow, which we just talked about. You don't want to get too trendy. I'm going to show you a few examples of that in a minute. You want to select options that appeal to a wider range of people because you're thinking, everybody who's the biggest market share, say, of that selection. You don't want to get too specific in the taste and what you're doing in choices. So you also want to consider bringing more trendy elements with accessories and paint, not with tile, say, or cabinetry or appliances. Do it with something small that can be changed out easily. And then don't forget to update the lighting. If you fail to do that, you can have a fantastic finish, but with older lighting, which I'm going to show you right now. Actually, go to the lighting first. Let's see if I can. I'll go back. Oh, nope, that wasn't the one. Okay, there was one picture that I had in there for you that was hold on. It was related to an old fluorescent long light fixture that looked kind of like the schoolroom variety that was over a kitchen. So when we see those, if at all possible, we take them out and replace them with something more attractive. You don't want to cheap out on that stuff because it kind of pulls the whole thing down. So this first picture is an example of something that's kind of crammed in a small space, and sometimes you can't always have everything in there. So this, in this case here, if you were to open that dishwasher and try to rinse dishes, say at the sink to put in the dishwasher, it would be a big reach, we'll say. So that is definitely something that I would try to avoid. Also, just because of the space you're trying to cram in a whole lot of things. Think about other places. Maybe you can, move out, say, that wall that's there, or, kind of reconfigure things. Okay, this next one. Not my screen just froze on me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the next one shows pretty obvious. You have two drawers that hit one another, and this one can only be opened so far because it hits the handle, the pull on the drawer pull. So you want to avoid things like that. Until you actually install it, sometimes it seems like such a great, oh, look what we fit in, and then you go to use it, practically speaking, and it's impossible. So you have that problem. So in this case, I know this is a really extreme example on the right here with the red cabinets. If you lift up that sink to the, or that counter to the left, there is actually a toilet there. And I know if I could hear you all, you'd be laughing and going, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they put a toilet in the kitchen. But they did. So, and on the left-hand side, same situation. If you open up that dishwasher, and you're standing at the sink, all good. But on the other side, you can't open up that cabinet or be at the stove top and use the dishwasher and load it, say, at the same time. So it's very restrictive in that regard. So this one is just an example of two support beams, two columns, I'm sorry, that go up through the countertop. So I feel like there would have been a better solution, not having been there. And, when you get into the thick of it, and you can kind of walk around the space and look at it spatially, there probably could have been a better solution. But this is what they came up with. Okay, this one has to do with both not a good thing to do and also safety. This is where you never want to put water and electricity next to each other. So you have, as you can see, an older type panel, but it's up there with the breakers on the left. And then underneath that board or whatever it is, cutting board, you have a sink there. So the proximity of those two is very bad. So you don't want to do that. Anytime there's a panel facing into the kitchen, we actually try to reverse it in the wall to the other wall if at all possible. So for instance, we had one in the kitchen we just finished a renovation for, and it was literally over the stove, and we flipped it to the other side of the wall, which opened out, faced out into the living room. So if we were going to have the electrician come in and work on everything anyway, him reversing the panel wasn't a lot more to do, and it's just much safer. So that would be the recommendation. This is one of those trendy examples. that I thought I would just demonstrate here. Um, believe it or not, these things exist. You walk in and you think, why? But, when the person's living there and it's their own home and they see it and like it or see something on TV, I don't know where they get the idea, magazine maybe, and then they do it and they leave. This is what we walk into when we're, say, purchasing an investment property for a buy and hold or a flip. So, this is an example of something I would try to avoid as a trendy example. This is also, it's kind of, they did it on the countertop as well as on the backsplash. It's, I don't know. It's really something. So I'll just leave it at that. I have to say, Loretta Bell, I can see your face in the bottom corner of my screen, and you smiling is it's awesome because I can see that reaction. So it's pretty cool because when you're talking to everybody and they're all muted, it's kind of hard to, you're speaking into the void. So thank you. All right, this one is a really good example of not putting the cabinet, say, over the refrigerator where it can be reached. What we typically do is we do a side panel, a fridge panel floor to ceiling, and then we actually mount the cabinet flush to the front so you can just reach up over the refrigerator and open up those doors and reach, whatever it is up there. And it just looks so much more finished and custom, and it doesn't take much more than that. You build out a box behind, you put the fridge panel on either side, whichever is required, and the extra costs, you're talking hundreds probably. Okay, based on what we've done anyway, hundreds. Okay, this is my favorite. You got to look at this one for a bit. You got to see where the toilet is in relation to the door and the tub, and then you have this glass partition type decorative wall, I guess, glass wall door. So, placement and all of that in this case is kind of suspect, I'll say. And I can't even imagine being in that tub. If you see that kind of that steel kind of basin style on the right, and somebody comes to the door, I don't know. I don't know what you say, what you do. It's just, I don't know. Anyway, all right, number 3. You don't want to cheap out. Don't splurge on the wrong things. Don't over improve. You have to read the room. Look at the price point of the property, what it is now, what it's going to be with your ARV, and what your exit strategy is. So, would I put a marble countertop maybe, or marble, tub and all kind of wonderful things like that in a house maybe that's in that 80 to 125,000 range, ranch style home, and do this massively spacious royal type bathroom or kitchen? Typically no, because you're not going to get your money back. So you just want to think about, what makes sense, what's common sense. And there's certain times where you do say want to put a granite countertop in a house that's, say, in that 100, 120, 150 range, or higher, of course, but in that range in particular, because maybe you're going to resell it and you want to get the biggest bang for the buck. And maybe that's the thing that's going to take you over, the line there for your value. But just try to not put things in that don't make sense. For example, putting granite countertops is great, but putting them on top of very old, junky cabinets isn't great, because you live with that now. You have to live with those cabinets because they're under that granite, and that granite's not going anywhere. So you would have to take it all apart to replace the cabinets. So put the money into the cabinets and the granite if you're going to do granite. Skimping on counter space. The rule is you're supposed to leave approximately, and I'm sure the interior designers and architects out there can tell you better, but my experience has been with them, that you leave about 2 feet, 24 inches on either side of the stove and the sink, if at all possible, for, pots, pans, prep work, cutting boards, who knows what. It's just easier for the person that's in the kitchen. Failing to update your lighting, we already talked about. You want it to look inviting. And also the lighting that you put in, it needs to be enough for the space so it doesn't look dark, whether it's recessed, lighting, or track lighting, or whatever is the the thing to do. You want to make sure that the lighting is sufficient enough and that doesn't have the old-fashioned kind of hue, that yellow blue type hue that kind of brings the space down and it doesn't feel really inviting. So think about the lighting, about brightening it up. Also, the things you do want to focus on in this category is your cabinets that we talked about, countertops. Consider other things besides granite as well, like butcher block, and of course your appliances and the fixtures. So something as small as a kitchen sink faucet can make a huge wow factor or difference in a kitchen. A pendant light over the sink doesn't take a lot, but that really gives you kind of another push on that wow factor. And of course, as I always say, and I know people are tired of hearing me say this, but backsplash, please install a backsplash. They're so great when you talk about increasing value. The look, it sells it better. It does give you that wow factor if it's done properly. If you're nervous about what to select as far as color or um, grout colors, tile colors, mosaics, all that. It's safe, be safe. If you want to just go the safe route, traditional route, just go with a standard subway tile and a white grout, white on white. And that is timeless. It always looks good. It's easy to maintain and clean in between if you're doing a rental space as far as a buy and hold, or if it's a flip, you can go into something a little, deeper as far as mosaics. But either way, that subway tile still looks great when you do that on a flip. So you just want to look at that. And you want to look at what the longevity is, what's easy to maintain, what looks good for a very long time and it holds up for countertops and cabinets. We don't buy any cabinet that's not an all wood box. So for instance, we don't shop at the big box stores for our cabinets because they're made out of MDF and particle board, and that's on the shelves anyway. Anything that's all wood from the big box stores, you have to special order. So we get our cabinets from providers locally and also nationally that are all wood, and they don't cost any more money. They're about the same price. So just an FYI on that. So some examples. Oh, here's that light fixture I was trying to show you earlier. So that's the example of what I would say that you would pull out and put something more attractive in there. And this just kind of shows you on the left hand side here what it can look like before and then with a little bit of an upgrade with lighting, better lighting. And also, as you can see on the left hand side, they changed the design layout on the kitchen and also changed out the sink, painted the cabinets and things. They kind of reconfigured things there. So it looks much nicer. All right, this is a really good example of not really thinking about outcomes and how things look in the end. And these are real things that happened. Not on my projects, I can say, thankfully, but they do happen. So it's amazing what people will build around or work with. Or this left-hand side example here with the outlet switch covers. Instead of doing it right, they instead of doing a regular double switch, it should have been. They do two singles side by side like that. It just, I don't know. I don't know what to say. All right, this one is an example of somebody who I'm guessing they probably had this range hood and it was sitting in their garage or somebody gave it to them and they're like, I have to incorporate that into my house or my kitchen or something. And they decided to build this situation here where they have attached this range hood in the middle of the kitchen for venting over a stove top or whatever the case. It's a kind of an example of something that stands out like it's an elephant in the room kind of thing. So I would try to avoid something like that. This is an example of older style hardware on a cabinet. If you take that off and you put some newer drawer pulls and door pulls, what a difference it makes. Just take those off. It doesn't cost a ton of money. You can do it yourself if you'd like. So I would highly recommend you look at things like those. Details make a big difference. All right, number 4. So screening the tenants. This is a huge money pit. Being a property manager, we have our own company here in Fayetteville, and I can tell you this is one of the biggest problems that we are told when our clients come to us and say, hey, I have this so many unit or this house or whatever it is, and we have all these problems, and it turns out almost all the time that there was no screening either by the prior management company or by the owner slash landlord, just because they didn't know maybe what they were supposed to do in the case of the landlord owner, or the prior management company either failed to do it, but whatever it was, they failed their client and they failed themselves because their credentials, their brand is all impacted severely. They lost their business, that business that they lost. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you screen your tenants. There's so many easy ways to do this today, especially. But failure to screen tenants leads to so many problems. Unpaid rent. So I was telling a few people earlier that we just had to file as a result of the coronavirus. We sent out COVID-19 letters on April 1st to all of our tenants that we manage and own, the homes that we own and that are rented out. And we reached out to them and we said, COVID-19, if you have an issue, please reach out. We included a tenant hardship letter, like a form that they could fill out and send back to us, and they can show us if they lost their job or not. We then entered into about 5 or 6 across the board, which wasn't that many considering, um, payment agreements, so people could then pay their April and or May rent over the course of time, so they didn't get evicted and or ejected from their home when it passes. So out of all of those many, 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 we got like I said, 5 or 6 that came back and worked out these agreements. There were 3 that we heard nothing from, 0. And so we continuously contacted them throughout April and May and early June up till today, saying, hey, we haven't heard what's going on, knocking on the door. I mean, we've tried everything from, taping envelopes with the letters in them on their door and taking pictures of it for proof of service on our own part, to also mailing them, of course, emailing them, everything. So we're covering all bases. So I went to court. I had to file for eviction, and our early June filings are not going to be heard in court until September 4th. So that's just an example. Costly evictions. Of course, right now, because of this backlog due to COVID, it's going to be a 5 or 6 month loss on each of those 3 in our case. So, and it's not great, so you got to screen. In this case with COVID, we did screen, of course. We did actually 2 of these that we had to file on were inherited kind of management homes and apartments, and one was somebody who had lost their job, but they just didn't, I guess, come forward. I don't know. So we're trying to work with them. But either way, other than that, as far as unpaid rent, people sometimes, if you don't screen really well, they don't really have skin in the game, so to speak, and they don't really don't take much pride in their home. They leave debris outside, vehicles parked on the lawn. When they leave it in very poor condition because maybe when you didn't screen, their credit score was really low and they have nothing to lose. So they're like, whatever, I don't care about the security deposit, and they just move out. So that really is important to screen for and hold to a certain standard, or have them pay more money on their security deposit, which is fine. Frequent turnover, when you don't screen, you have more like a revolving door. The lower the price point on the home, and I found this to be true in every market that I've managed in. The lower the rent, the more often the vacancy occurs, and the more likely you have problems, unfortunately. The higher the price point on the rent, less so. So I don't know if that helps. I hope it does. But when you have frequent turnover, obviously there's vacancy loss you have to include, and also your repetitive renovation costs, because you keep on cleaning and cleaning and doing painting, whatever, in between each person. And then the other thing is the landlord tenant regs being out of compliance. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes as far as outdated forms go. All right, so these are a few examples. People parking on the lawn. One of the biggest pet peeves that I have is when there's a car parked on the grass. And I always explain to them that the connection from the house the main line sewer line to the street is underneath that lawn, and if they park on it, we've had it happen where people crack that pipe. After a good storm, the ground is soft or whatever, everything converges, and that's what happens. They don't think anything about it. And we explain it, and we send them letter after letter after letter, and until you literally physically walk with them and point it to them and say, this is why, and is what happens. And it's very costly to fix that, as you can imagine. So that's why, it's one of my things I just really can't abide. Um, on the right hand side, you kind of see where people just don't really care. You can see it. It's all over the place, you know. So eviction damages, just to kind of spell it out a little more in detail, is you have these things that you have to pay for. One of them is obviously the vacancy loss and the lost rental income. If you're charging late charges, and just for the record, we waived all of our late charges April and May, as we were, urged to do through the executive order from the Cumberland County Court. Delays, obviously 3 months out as of today, so that's not cool, but it is what it is, and we got to live with it. Damage to the premises, which we already talked about, the cost of repair and or the replacement costs to cabinets, countertops, vanity tops that have cigarette burns all over them, flooring. Yeah, there's just so many things, of course. And then the court costs themselves. If we filed on every single one of the ones that, that we manage, say, just in, kind of planning, thinking that this could happen and then just dismiss the court dates later. Kathy was saying earlier that could cost us, with how many we have to manage, it could be like $10,000 in court fees, clerk's fees, and sheriff's fees for service and filing. So eviction damages are no joke. You want to really kind of screen people to avoid this at all costs. So this is kind of what you end up with. And unfortunately, this is not, something made up. I mean, we have walked into these homes, walls that have been, hammers in the walls, and tire irons and everything you could imagine just that they could do. Up in Massachusetts, I actually walked into a house that we were looking at for due diligence inspection, and people had poured cement down the plumbing, down the drains, and it was just awful. So, they can really wreak some havoc. So you really want to think about who you're putting in there, screen them well, and be fair, fair housing, right?
There's a question for you, Cheryl, from
Sure.
Loretta. Loretta Bell asks, what is the typical rent range where you have the fewest problems?
I would say some probably in between like 899, we'll call it 900 and up. Anything from 799, or in that range between that, you know, there's kind of that gray area in the 800 range, not so much going on in there, but anything below 800 in particular, um, yeah, there's a lot higher occurrence of this happening.
So Denise Kunzel has not a question, but a comment about what you're saying, screening tenants. Ask to see their vehicle. They will keep your house the same way.
Oh, great idea. That's great. Yeah, and also I've gone to other when they submit an application and they say this is where I live, I've shown up and I know, and I knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'm just here to say hello, and we just wanted to, see where you live now, so we can kind of get an idea as to, how you're going to keep the place and all of that." And you're totally, you're checking references, you're doing your due diligence, so just like with a contractor, you're going to check on their work, right? Don't be afraid, to go out there and say, "Hey, I'm going to come and, do a home visit." If you tell them in advance, of course, they're going to make it look as good as possible. So sometimes it's good just to kind of like pop by if it's local, of course, and you can. So you kind of get a feel for it, you know. Okay. Outdated forms. This is a big one. Um, there are lost court cases and delays in evictions because they have to postpone because the forms weren't filed correctly, or they weren't the right forms, or they on the filing they selected the thing that didn't go. It wasn't appropriate to what they were trying to accomplish. For instance, you select that there was some criminal activity, and it's about payment, failure to pay rent. So if it's a breach, it's a breach. That can be a failure to pay rent. And I'm sure, talk to your attorneys, get counsel from them and advice from them, but make sure that your forms are up to date. You want to avoid those possible lawsuits, obviously, and delays. Especially sometimes you have to completely pay to refile. They won't always let you just fix it, you know. Um, don't, please, 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 don't charge the incorrect late fee amounts. For the state of North Carolina, I'm sure y'all know in the area of landlord, if you do that, it's 5%. Don't exceed 5%. So every time we put it into our system and we're adding a new client's household for a rental, we physically do it on the calculator because I don't want them to guess at what it could be or should be. So we just put in the rent and times 0.05 and we get that number, and that's what we put in the system. I just don't want them to be like, oh, it's, this flat rate of whatever. Don't do that.
And just so
It
you
will.
know, Cheryl, when I look at leases that people draft, that is the most common mistake that I see, as that they've charged just randomly like a $50 or $100 late fee that way exceeds 5%. And those of you who are listening, what Cheryl just said is extremely important, because it's not just a simple mistake. If you put a late fee in there that exceeds 5%, you can't charge any late fee. Your late fee is waived. That's by statute. So she is making a very great point right now.
Okay, great. So also you want to be very careful with your older forms and, just in general, discrimination claims. You have to treat everybody equal. Fair housing, fair housing, fair housing. If you don't know all the details, look it up. I'm going to actually share something with you in a minute that might be helpful in that regard. Also, please note that the forms change frequently, sometimes more than once a year. So don't assume that the form that you have in the drawer or your file or wherever, a year or two ago was still okay. And there's no excuse if you didn't know. They don't care, It's not protection because, oh, I didn't know. Think of it like, I know in the workplace, everybody probably went through at some point the sexual harassment training, especially now with the whole most recent things with the Me Too movement. I used to, as a corporate trainer, I taught sexual harassment training. And one of the biggest things to take away from the employer side is there is nothing that they have to train everybody. They are definitely accountable. They have to put things in motion and things in place where people can report and feel comfortable reporting. So it's extremely important that you are up on these laws. I know that I myself attended something that the TREIA actually hosted with Will Brownlee yearly, and last October I attended that, and we took so much information away from there, and we love going to that meeting. We'll continue to go to that meeting so we can do our best for our client owners as well as ourselves to make sure that we have all of the most updated information in those documents, from the leases to any addendums, attachments, forms, all of it. Okay. One of the biggest things that I see from inheriting, files that were managed by another management company or landlord is people put in things. They just add things that they want, but are not legal, you know. Um, so there is I think it's in the standard lease, it's either number 35 or 36, but it basically says that everybody has to, this all, it depends upon, we all have to follow the laws of the state, right? So I'm subject to them, the tenant is, and everybody. So everything that's in this lease has to be legal, or it's not going to fly. So when you add something like that, it's not going to be considered. It's going to be thrown out. It's going to hurt your case, so to speak. It's just not good. So don't add just things to the lease. I've seen things like, if you bounce a check, you have to pay $100. There's a cap on that, by the way. You can't do that. There's certain very specific rules. So talk to your attorney or somebody, who's in the know about this. And I would highly recommend an attorney that handles landlord-tenant law or regulations regarding pet rent versus pet fees. I actually worked for a national company years ago that charged pet rent, and they were taken to, the whatever they call it, to the woodshed. Okay, they were taken to the cleaners, and they were sued. So fees versus rent. You have to be very careful, legally speaking. Okay. All right, number 6. Oh, I'm sorry. What is legal and what's not legal? So again, speak with your attorney, but this is a pamphlet that's online. It's available, and it's just the standard that's put out there, how to follow landlord laws in North Carolina as it pertains to the 4 major things. Security deposit. There's certain rules that govern what you can and can't do. Rental agreement, of course, the late fees we already talked about, and notice of entry. Um, so probably going back 15 years ago, I know I'm probably dating myself here again, but I took over, we acquired a large, I think it was probably 150 units or so, apartment building out in the Cape. Really beautiful building, right near the ocean and all of this. And so went in there, talking to the management group. We had to put some notices out to the building. I may have mentioned this in a prior, video meeting like this, so I apologize if you've heard it already. But basically, the maintenance supervisor and their crew that had been there for probably, I think he said 20, 25 years. So I handed him the flyers that had to go out. There were notices of entry because we had to do walkthroughs of all the units for physical inspection. And so we handed him this big stack of 150 or so flyers that he had to send out, give out, walk around. And what we always did was we'd roll it up and we'd put it in between the door jamb and the doorknob, so we didn't have to put it under a carpet or a floor, whatever, under the door. I mean, so it was just there. So if they opened their door, it fell, they'd see it. It was very obvious. And everybody got one. So that's what we would do in the other properties. So I go out and I look around and I don't see anything anywhere. No rolled up notices. So I go back to the office and I said, "Hey, I can't remember what his name was. We'll call him Joe." So I said, "Hey, Joe, what happened to the notices? They're gone, or they didn't get put out." And he says, "Oh no, I delivered them all." And I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, I opened up all the doors and I put them inside on the kitchen counters." And I was like, okay, hold on. I'm like, you have to give notice to enter, right? So unless the person over the phone or in person says to you, yes, you can go in to either give me something or fix something or do whatever, you have to put it in writing. So this actual notice was the notice that was saying, hey, we're going to be entering tomorrow between 2 and 4. And he actually broke and entering, and he went in to everybody's home without permission and put them on everybody's kitchen counter, 150 of them. And some people were home and they were used to it. So they're like, "Oh, hey, do you want to have a cup of coffee? Would you like so, or whatever." And he thought nothing of it. And he's like, What did I do wrong?" And I was like, "You didn't provide notice of entry and you entered without permission." And believe it or not, he thought I was absolutely like, "What? That's no big deal. I do this all the time. I've been doing it for 20, 25 years." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And of course, I go back to the manager and I look at the manager who we also inherited with the property. And I'm looking at her thinking, I don't know. I just was trying to put 2 and 2 together. So make sure the takeaway is that you provide notice of entry. So you have to get their permission verbally or in writing, or you can give them a 24-hour notice in writing to go in. But you can't just enter, with the one exception, an emergency. So if you have, fire, smoke, water, flood, blood, all the danger of property, danger of life, then that's the exception, you know, but that's not what was happening. So you just have to make sure. Landlords many times will just go in. So you don't want to be one of those. So you got to know the rules. Okay. All right. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Oops. Go back. Um, all right. So just wanted to, yeah. All right. So reactive versus proactive. So we have clients, and I hate to say this because it's not the typical situation, but they will react versus be proactive. For example, changing HVAC filters. We do change the HVAC filters. We do it regularly. We want to prevent any mechanical failure because of, dust and so on, debris clogging it. But I've been, asked by people, don't do that, by the landlord owner, and or I should say, client owner, and I can't. I don't understand that, And the other is, oh, just give them the filters; they'll install them themselves. Well, from experience, I can tell you they don't do that typically. Very few do. So we highly recommend that you're proactive and that you change those filters. They're very inexpensive. You only have to do it every so often. Also, termites, prevention and treatment. You want to be very aware and mindful when you're purchasing to look for any of that activity, not just termites, but wood-burning insects, obviously. And then, of course, leaks. If you see any water leaks, and whether it's under a sink, if it's from a roof, it could be anything. You don't want to put those off because the water can be extremely damaging and very quickly damaging things. And of course, the byproduct of that is, mold and mildew and rot. So you want to avoid all of that. So be proactive. Okay. So this is an example of not changing the filter. And I actually can tell you, about 2 years ago, we took over a house for somebody, and they hadn't, kind of done anything with it for a very long time. And I think they just didn't probably know. But what happened is the filters didn't get changed, and the unit actually broke. I won't say the details, but it broke. So as you can imagine, a 15 or less dollar filter change every 3 to 6 months versus changing out an HVAC system or doing a major repair on it, you're talking thousands of dollars. So you want to be kind to it and be proactive with preventative maintenance. Also, this is an example of termites. Um, I was in a house once that had termites going up about 4 feet into the wall, and this is the rod, and you kind of hear this kind of crackly sound. That's evidence of termites. So you want to definitely jump right in there and not wait once you see any sign of that. So 7, doing things yourself. So everybody talks about that whole stay in your lane, and that's a great thing to do, because many investors and homeowners like to do their own work. What can lead to is you lose time. Because if you think about it, and I've had somebody tell me, which makes perfect sense when you hear them say it, but then when we say, well, what about this? It kind of changes things. So if they know how to do the work and they have the time and it takes them, I don't know, a month or two to install, which typically it does, to install, say, floors throughout an entire house because they're doing it after hours and on the weekends or whatever when they can get to it, versus hiring a pro and getting it done in a couple days, less than a week, fully. So the difference is they're thinking, well, I paid a whole lot less because I did it myself. Well, yeah, but the money that you saved or think you saved by paying, not paying them and just paying for material, is you probably lost about 2 or more months of vacancy loss. So you want to know when you purchase a home before it's completed what your per diem vacancy loss is. So when you make these decisions, it makes sense. Economically, it makes sense. You want to include that vacancy loss in your formula. Also, improper work. Wiring when you're not an electrician. Doing plumbing or roofing or any mechanicals in general, hire somebody to do it. You will be in a better situation because they're going to warranty the labor. They're going to provide, proper professional work. So it's worth it. Also, personal injury. You don't want to get hurt, electrocute yourself, fall, slip and fall. My stepfather years ago was helping us with our addition, and he fell off a ladder and he ended up, on crutches. And nobody was there. He was just there working by himself. And, it's very dangerous. So, and I feel so guilty about that. Thank God it was years ago and it's a distant memory. But you got to be careful and know what you don't know. Stay in that lane and set your limits and stick to them. Think of it like when you go to, if you go or if you're watched one on television, an auction. I went to a few auctions for, estate sales, and it's so easy to get caught up, or even an auction for a property, right? You have a number, you want to stay behind or, below that number and not exceed it. You know what your limits are, but when you get caught up in it, you want to win, and you exceed your limit. You go over the limit. You don't stick to it. So when it comes to this type of thing, you really do want to make a plan and stick to that plan for many reasons. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so these,
Cheryl, we have a question from Mimi Choi, and she's asking, so so do you go into the tenant unit on a regular basis to change things and inspect? What do you
yes.
change and inspect, and how often do you go in?
Okay, so we go in every 6 months. We change out smoke detectors, filters for the HVAC system. We also kind of, you want to take pictures, right? So you look around, you take pictures. You're looking for anything that's out of the norm, any kind of water issues. And that's typically when somebody says, oh, I've been saving this list for you, you know. So we do go in every 6 months and we do check over, the standard things like the safety things first and foremost, of course, and then the preventative maintenance things. Okay. All right. So let's go move on. So this is just an example, somebody doing their own plumbing, going through a ceiling, it happens, and you don't want that to happen. And even contractors can make mistakes, but at least if they do it, they're insured, they're the pro. You don't want to put yourself in that situation. All right. And don't let this be you. I wish I could hear you all laughing. I can see smiling faces. Okay. All right. So, number 8. So, champagne on a beer budget. So, I get it. I'm in the same boat. I get a house and I have a budget, and I can't exceed the budget, but I want more than the budget will allow me to have. So I feel your pain, but we all know we get what you pay for. If you hire the right people, the work's going to last. You're going to have very few problems either at during the sale, through a home inspection during the sale if you're flipping, or with residents calling or tenants calling after they've moved in with constant calls, this is leaking and that's not working and this outlet and so on and so forth. And it can just be you hire an electrician and they warranty their work, and that phone call happens, you're not out of pocket anything, you know and you all know that in the beginning when somebody moves in the first 6 months, that's when they're going to find the most issues, so you might as well have that warranty built right in. That's going to help you out.
Cheryl, Loretta Bell's asking, when you go in to do those inspections, if you find the property has not been kept up or clean, are you able to say anything to the tenant about it at that time?
Absolutely, yes. I call them on it right then and there and say, this how your home isn't being maintained. Is there something that we can help you with? Because at that point, I want them to say, oh well, blah blah blah, whatever it is. So at that point, I would say, well, you have an obligation that you have to maintain this. So you're going to need to do this and this and that, and I'm going to come back in 2 weeks and visit you again. So absolutely, yes, 100%. It's part of their lease. It's their job to maintain their home, and you can send them a violation letter and do all that stuff too, of course. But it's better to address it when you see it firsthand, okay, and make a plan to go back and visit it and hold them accountable. Okay. Be fair to everybody when you do that, by the way. You can't pick and choose. If you see a condition somewhere, and you don't say something, and then the next place you go and you skip it or you deal with it, you have to be, standard across the board, and make sure that you're follow through, because if you don't follow through, they're going to know, and they won't do anything. Also, if we get letters from the city of Fayetteville that will say, oh, this house address has a car in the driveway and all 4 tires are flat. and they send us a warning notice with a potential fine. So we contact the tenant, we go over, we talk to them, they get the car removed, and they'll many times say, I had no idea that they would send a violation about something like that, but they do, whether it's debris in the yard, cars that are in the yard, on the grass, in the, something that looks inoperable or abandoned in particular, so they're really cracking down. So yes, yeah, absolutely. Say something. All right. So where was I? Work materials. Yeah. So we talked about all of that. You don't want any improper plumbing wiring. It will bite you in the back. I almost said the other word with a B. Um, but if not today, it's going to hit you tomorrow. So you don't want to, kind of pay for the least amount of possible, pay and, think you've got, oh, great, we're done and they can move in. It's going to come back on you. It will. It always does. If it's not today, it's tomorrow or the next day. Oh, great example of a story. Quick one for you. So this is a good example of this. So we just started managing a property May 1st, 8 units. If any of the people are on here, I won't mention names, of course, of the owners if they're tuning into this. But we had a call a couple nights ago and very late in the evening. And it turned out that the hot water connection to the water heater, sorry, that was going into the wall was the wrong kind of material apparently that was on from prior, before we came along, and thank God. And so anyway, it was PEX, and it was kind of crimped and kind of bent in a way that it shouldn't have been. Anyway, the hot water tank, the pressure, the heat, the steam, all of it burst, and it flooded 2 units entirely, first floor of 2 units that were like sharing the same wet wall. So as you can imagine, the owners had to file an insurance claim, and there's a ton of restoration work that's going on there. But it's a really good example of somebody in a multifamily doing some DIY, or hiring a professional, or maybe the tenant, or I don't know who did the work, but it wasn't done by a professional. Everybody who came in and said, oh my gosh, wow, no wonder, when they looked at it, when we opened up the wall, it was clear that it wasn't the right way, wasn't done properly by a licensed plumber. So, and I feel bad for the owners, because I'm sure they were completely unaware, and they probably bought it with that, in place. So, there you have it. Real life example. All right, number 9, due diligence. So pre-purchase, we urge everybody to do this. We don't own a home inspection company. I don't get any kickbacks or anything, but get a home inspection, please. It's a fantastic tool in your toolbox as an investor. It will inform you of everything that you need to know, hopefully, before you purchase. Also, it educates you. It provides a clear picture, or clearer picture, of what you're buying and what you're getting into in this investment. That's also a fantastic way to negotiate a better deal potentially on the purchase, or terminate, back out, and say, nope, don't want it, and walk away. Also, sometimes it can lead to discoveries of lead paint, asbestos, radon, termite damage, dry rot, mold, who knows what. And use that home inspection to develop a scope of work for yourself, so that when you're pulling in contractors, you can hand it to them and say, these are the things that I need to get, prices on, so you know what your repair budget is. And then look at other things that are outside of that home inspection you may want to do, just to update it, so you can get higher rent, or a better, higher, ARV on your resale. Okay, so it can make or break it, seriously, doing that due diligence. Okay, so this is a quick little example on the left here of a diagram of what you might find, in a home inspection, what they look for, what they look at, kind of, they go under, whether it's a basement or a crawl space, or they go into the attic, and they really look very thoroughly, because you're paying them to do that. So you want to look at it. Also keep in mind that there are some things that they're going to flag as red, like safety hazards. So those are the things you pay attention most to, and then you work down your list as far as priority from there. Okay. All right, and the last one, I'm sure you're really happy about the fact that it's almost over. No. All right. So this is a big one, and it's kind of psychological. And I'm not a psychiatrist or anything psychologist, but fear of competition. I have seen this in the workplace, and I see this in networking and at meetings with real estate investors and so on. And one of the biggest things is they put up this wall, because they don't want to share because of the competition, like what if they get my deal or whatever. Um, there is so much more value to networking with people and making them your ally. You want to speak to them, and don't be afraid to go up and talk to them and determine how they can add value to your business and vice versa. Almost everybody you talk to has something that they can help you with. So you want to determine what that is. It doesn't have to take a long, 10, 20, 50, 15-minute conversation. It can be in a few minutes, kind of like, what do you do? What do you like to do? Blah, blah, blah. And then you can talk about it, identify something, follow up with them, and figure out how you can add value to one another. It's really big. One of the biggest things that I see is investors that are flipping or doing any kind of renovation work, they don't like to share their contractors because they're afraid they'll lose them, or they won't be available for them. But what we've been able to do to some extent here is, if you share them with other people in a kind of a network of people that you've identified that you can work with common goals, um, you can actually share that contractor, because maybe you're doing something, but then you'll have a gap, and you want to make sure that person comes back to you and is available to you later. So you can share them with somebody else in that network that you've developed, so that they're constantly working the contractor, and then they stick with that group. So that's a good thing. And if that can be shared even on a bigger scale, the approved type vendor list or something. Oh, yeah. So Jim was just suggesting that if you can keep them busy locally in the same location, even better. So if you can develop that network with people, in the same area, community, that way they don't have to drive 2 hours here or an hour in that direction to do whatever they have to do. It's easier for them if they can stay in that, closer, sphere of, geographically speaking. All right. So I think we are at the end here. So yeah, embrace the competition. Don't fear it. When you go to the TREIA, the general TREIA meeting, there are all these great little, groups that they put out, and you breakout sessions and all these things that happen. Don't be afraid to talk to people, develop your elevator pitch. Really work on it and know what you need to say that's going to add value to somebody else, so they're going to want to come back and talk to you, and it's going to grow and scale your business and or your education, or both. So highly recommend it. Embrace it.
Cheryl,
So,
Denise Kunzel's asking if you would share your lease agreement.
oh, I'd have to think about that one.
Is it really recommended that you would get your own drafted by your attorney? It's not a really good
Yeah.
idea to share other people's, because they're custom made for your own needs.
Yeah, I mean, we've really worked on ours and tweaked it like crazy. And so I have to say that it's for our clients. So if you want me to share it with you, you can become a client, and we'll manage your property in Fayetteville.
You should contact your own attorney and get your own drawn for your own needs, honestly.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. So yeah, if you have any questions, our contact information is right there. It's on the presentation. I'm assuming that TREIA is going to put it up on the website, so that they, you have that information from this particular presentation anyway. Or you can email us at patriotrealestateservices@gmail.com if you have any questions.
The video should be up in a week or so for members to, can access. And if anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to put them in chat. Otherwise, Cheryl, thank you so much. As always, that was awesome. Cheryl is always a wealth of information and gives such wonderful presentations. We're so lucky to have her.
Yep.
Loretta Bell says, awesome, thank you. As you just heard Cheryl say, when you go to TREIA meetings, network, get out there and get to know people. Of course, we can't do that right now because we're all stuck in COVID land, but every single one of us is is really looking forward to that time when we can be back in person again, because it's oh so much better than these wonderful Zoom meetings. But in the meantime, we do have some ways you could network. We have the Triangle Real Estate Investors Association networking page on Facebook. Please join us. It's very active. You can post deals there. You can ask for things. People are looking for all kinds of things, from roofers to hard money lenders. So feel free to post there. We do allow non-members to join that page, but they're not allowed to post. So you'll have a larger audience. I believe it's around 1,000 members now, but only you can post. Facebook has a new feature called Rooms, and I'm working on trying to set up a networking evening with a Facebook room, but I haven't figured out how to do it yet. As soon as I do that, I'll let you know. But like Cheryl said, joining TREIA is a great first step, and you did it, but now take advantage of your membership. Get involved. Offer to volunteer. Make a member spotlight video like the one you saw at the beginning of this meeting. Everyone is welcome to do that, whether you're a brand new member or whether you've been a member for 10 years. In this time when we can't meet face-to-face, send us an email at treiaprojects@gmail.com. We'll send you the guidelines. You can make that video and we'll play it. People will see your face. They'll get to know you. You can tell them what you do, what you're looking for, and you know, what you need and what you want, and they'll get to know you. And it's a great way to meet people in the absence of live meetings. Mm-hmm. And the last thing is that we are always looking for things that you want to get out of TREIA. What do you want TREIA to be for you? Do you want to see a certain speaker or a certain class or a certain project? Please let us know. We are trying to set up projects for things that you want.
Great.
I did not get any more questions. Leslie or Jackie or Cheryl, anything else you would like to say?
No, I'm just looking forward to presenting next month, and I hope everybody signs up. Pre-register in advance, please.
We might want to mention, Kathy, the main meeting Tuesday.
Yeah. Oh, the main meeting.
Unbelievable speakers we got lined up. It's a panel, and it's going to be information overload. So y'all want to get signed up early. You want to get checked in on that early, because we're probably going to have a couple hundred people on that. So checking everybody in, as you know, is not exactly the easiest, but we're doing our best. And make sure that your screen name matches your TREIA name. Please, please, and please. You guys are doing a great job at that. And it makes it so much quicker for us to get you checked in, because we have to, the check-in is just a mirror of what we would normally do at our in-person meetings. So everybody needs to understand that it's very difficult for us if we don't know who you are, and also with Zoom warning everybody about hacking and unauthorized people being on meetings. It's just one way we can secure what we're doing, and it's really helpful for us. So if everybody can just make sure that they have their screen name, their Zoom screen name, that's matching that their TREIA account name, it's so much easier. But be on that main meeting on Tuesday. And
it's all about doing business in the time of COVID. So it's from investors who are active right now, and also from the Wake County Register of Deeds, who's going to share some numbers with you of what's going on right here locally.
The actual guy, the actual Register of Deeds people.
Charles Gilliam.
Charles.
We call him Rod.
We call him Rod.
Jackie, I have a question for Jackie Richards. When is your flight back from London?
Yeah.
Here in Downton Abbey.
I'm virtually taking off in about 20 minutes.
Oh, good for you. All right. Well, have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Cheryl. Awesome as usual. I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.